Thank you so much, Eric. Very interesting. Yes, we do have time for questions during this section. So one of the things that have already come up in the excuse me in the chat is the question of water sports. Is that something you've considered?
Yeah, so floating was one of the things we highlighted there, and then Dr. Robert Burns on the call here has also studied kayaking and rafting on the White Salmon River. So certainly it's something that is obviously an activity that's water sports are prominent in the gorge and something we're thinking about. Kiting and windsurfing, those are both things that I don't personally study, and they're less studied in the literature, although there are a few places, few folks that study that in particular. But unfortunately, that's not one of the things that I work on specifically.
I just want to say, please feel free to add your questions into the chat, and we'll start answering them that way. Why has hiking increased so much in the gorge?
Well, I think that hiking has really jumped up across the country, and so I think what we see in the gorge is that really a mirroring of what we have seen across the country. People really seem to be interested in hiking presently, and I think we're just sort of following up on that. And in many cases, the gorge is located in a very convenient location to a lot of population centers. And so we have a lot of people and they're close to a place where they can do an activity they really seem to be interested in at present.
Okay. And many of these topics are big questions that we will, we hope to tackle as we go forward. But there's a question about phony folk culture. Can you?
Yeah, so that is actual quote from people think that we don't have fun as scientists or economists, but sometimes we do. And so phony folk culture was actually a quote in one of those articles that I cited, and so I included it in there. But I think it is a feeling in the video there from Venice. I saw that, and people talking about souvenir shops and things that aren't really connected to the place. And those of us who live here in the gorge or work in the gorge are, we know it's a special place and some place that we come to with a certain amount of reverence. And that's similar to many other places that are popular with tourists and outdoor recreationists. And so the literature highlights this notion that the people that are coming to the place are losing that connection to the landscape and instead sort of doing something that they could do anywhere. They can buy a knickknack at a souvenir shop or something else that isn't really connected to the location. And so that's what the literature in that particular article talking about phony fake culture, I think that's what they're focused on.
Great. There's a lot of great, so, and this is exactly what we were hoping for. There's a lot of great questions that are popping up that we'd like to tackle. So for example, AJ had the $1 million question: how do we balance safety with the happiness of the people locally? The undiscovered sites in the gorge that used to be one of our easy ways of directing folks are being discovered. So any thoughts on expansion of visitation to shoulder areas around the gorge? Any thoughts on that? And again, Eric, it doesn't have to be, we all need to answer these questions, but please feel free to.
Oh, someone else can jump. This is part of why we're here today, I think, for you all to have a conversation about some of these topics. I can tell you, in the research literature, there's been some changes thinking about how much we should try to move people to other sites. And in some places, if people who are visiting a really crowded site are happy being there and getting what they want out of that experience, maybe there isn't too much of what does moving them to a different site accomplish? And so the research literature is currently kind of having discussions around that. But I think that's what you all are really here today, to have these sorts of discussions about what to do going forward.
There's another question here that, have you done any studies limiting parking? So how it impacts visitors and the people's use and options of recreation?
Yeah, there's been a number of studies about different actions to mitigate a number of visits to a place. Limiting parking is one. There's limited entry permits. There's shuttle buses. lots of these things are implemented around the country, and those things are widely studied. And it's also, you know, in the context of what I just said about the literature, trying to understand a little more about the recreation experience and those actions. That's one aspect of the literature. Another is those things are often done because we're finding resource damage that's unacceptable for our management goals. And so we need to implement some sort of action to limit that resource management. And that's what managers in the agencies are really trying to make those decisions. And thankfully, I don't have to do that because I'm in the science side of the agency, but these are challenging questions. Yeah.
But also, speaking of that, are there any best practices, case studies on best practices about the trail systems that are resilient, so that absorb those surges in visitation with minimal impact? And would those principles also help trail systems absorb trends in increased use? Is there any data out there on that?
I'm sure there are some examples, and I'm not. None of them are coming to light. I think we can learn by identifying what others have done and identifying systems, say limited entry systems or shuttle bus systems that work well in other locations, and thinking about how those can apply in different settings. I think there's other aspects of this problem solving that also needs to recognize that we get some of the best solutions when we're thinking about locally based or, you know, decisions that we're really thinking about local context. So, yeah.
Okay. And yes, there's a great comment here that the locals do not want the undiscovered places discovered. Completely understand that.